First class, huh? Mr. Gregson sneered loudly from across the aisle, his voice carrying more than just curiosity. You don't look like you belong here. He leaned back in his seat, eyes scanning Amina's attire. Elegant, poised, but perhaps too understated for his liking. Must be nice to just buy your way in. Amina's grip on the armrest tightened, but she said nothing. The weight of the words hung heavy in the air, thick with condescension. Her gaze shifted briefly to the flight attendant, who was visibly uncomfortable but didn't intervene. Gregson continued, his voice a little louder now, meant for anyone who would listen. People like you don't just end up in these seats. Must be some sort of mistake. The sarcasm in his tone was blatant, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in, targeting Amina with his next words. Must be nice to get a free pass based on skin color, huh? She could feel the heat rise in her chest, the sting of his words like tiny daggers aimed at her identity. Amina had been through so much to get here. The accolades, the years of hard work, the sleepless nights, none of it mattered to Gregson. To him, she was a stereotype, nothing more than the sum of her skin and a twisted interpretation of her presence. Amina held her breath, trying to block out the growing tension, but his eyes never wavered, and the other passengers. They sat, awkwardly quiet, but none of them spoke up. The insults didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder. Gregson's voice was now thick with mockery. So, tell me, Judge, he drawled, staring directly at Amina. How did you manage to get to where you are? You must have had help, right? Couldn't possibly be that you actually earned it. His grin widened as the words sunk in. I mean, we all know how it works. It's not about what you know, but who you know. Amina's face flushed with the sting of each word. He was digging in deeper now, dismissing her hard-earned accomplishments with a level of disrespect she couldn't ignore. Tell me, Gregson went on, his voice growing louder. Do you even know what it takes to be a judge? I bet your qualifications are questionable at best. The heat behind his words sent a chill through Amina. She had worked tirelessly to get here, to earn her seat at the table, and here was a man, a complete stranger, diminishing her life's work with a few careless comments. Every word from him felt like an attack, a slashing dismissal of everything she had fought for. And I'm sure that position's just for show, right? Gregson smirked, oblivious to the discomfort he was causing. You don't actually have to work as hard as everyone else, do you? Amina wanted to respond, to strike back with every ounce of dignity she had, but the words felt trapped, lodged somewhere deep inside her chest. As Gregson's words grew more venomous, a suffocating silence settled over the cabin. Amina's eyes flicked to the passengers around her. The woman beside her pretended to be engrossed in a magazine. The man across the aisle stared out the window, avoiding any sign of acknowledgement. No one moved, no one said anything. The silence felt deafening. Every part of her body screamed to stand up and defend herself, to make sure that Gregson knew the impact of his words, but the isolation in the air held her back. She was alone, surrounded by people who either didn't care or didn't want to get involved. Amina's stomach twisted. This was worse than the insults themselves. The failure of those around her to speak up only amplified her sense of isolation. It was as if her voice didn't matter, as if she wasn't worth standing up for. The truth was clear. The world had taught her that her dignity wasn't something people were willing to fight for. Her fists clenched, nails digging into the palms of her hands as she forced herself to breathe evenly. Her heart pounded, but she held her head high. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her crack. She had been through worse, hadn't she? But in that moment, with every word cutting deeper, she wasn't sure how much more she could endure. Her body trembled with the need to speak, to shout, to say something, anything, that would make him understand how wrong he was. But still, she held it in. It was like holding back an ocean, the current of her emotions crashing against the dam she'd built within herself. Amina closed her eyes, trying to regain control. Every muscle in her body screamed for release, but she couldn't let it show. Not yet. She could hear Gregson muttering under his breath, no doubt thinking that he had won, that he had broken her. But what he didn't know was that this was not her defeat. This was just the beginning. The tension in the air was palpable. Just as Amina felt herself beginning to unravel, there was a shift. Something changed, but she couldn't yet see it coming. "Amina, are you sure you want to go there?" Her grandmother's voice echoed in the hallway, full of concern as Amina tightened her backpack straps. "I have to, Grandma. They don't expect me to be there, but that's exactly why I have to go." The neighborhood she came from wasn't kind to dreams. It wasn't kind to people who looked like her. But Amina had always been different. She wasn't supposed to make it out, not according to the whispers behind her back, not according to the stares when she walked into a room full of people who thought their futures were already mapped out. She had nothing but a relentless drive to become what no one thought she could be: a judge. Walking down the cracked pavement, she couldn't help but remember how every step forward had been a battle. The odds were stacked against her, but there was something inside her, something fierce, that pushed her forward, determined to prove them wrong. The first day of law school, Amina walked in with her head high, but the weight of uncertainty pressed on her chest. She was the only black woman in a class full of well-heeled students, and they made sure she knew it. "Do you even know what a writ of habeas corpus is?" A student had sneered, the condescension dripping from his words. Amina, swallowing the sting, had simply answered the question, her voice steady, her mind focused. But inside, her blood boiled. She had spent years battling stereotypes, years of hearing that black people didn't belong in spaces like this, that women like her couldn't succeed here. It was never just about being smart enough. She had to prove herself every day. Every day was a struggle against those subtle slights. The compliments about how articulate she was, the questions about her background, the lingering doubt in people's eyes that said she didn't belong. Even when she secured her first internship at a prestigious firm, the microaggressions didn't stop. She would hear her colleagues whispering about her qualifications, questioning whether she'd gotten the job because of diversity quotas. But Amina had learned to hold her head up, even when it felt like it might crack under the pressure. She fought not just for a spot at the table, but for the validation she so often had to fight for. The validation she deserved, but had to carve out herself. As a judge now, Amina had finally reached the place she'd dreamed of as a young girl. But the weight of it often felt like more than she could carry. She was proud, yes, proud of everything she had worked for, proud of proving everyone wrong, proud of shattering expectations. But it was never as simple as feeling triumphant. Every day she entered that courtroom, she carried the knowledge that her presence meant something far bigger than just her success. She was one of the few black women in the profession, a pioneer, yes, but also a symbol, whether she liked it or not. And the expectations, both internal and external, never let up. She thought about the days when she felt like she was fighting a never-ending battle, against stereotypes, against biases, against the eyes that expected her to fail simply because of the color of her skin. And even in those quiet moments, when the courtroom was silent, the weight of being a trailblazer always loomed over her. But what choice did she have? To give up was to let everyone who ever doubted her win. To stand still was to allow the system to keep her in her place. And Amina would never let that happen. As she settled into her seat on the plane, Amina allowed herself a rare moment of peace. She was en route to a major court case, one that could set a precedent for how the law handled issues of racial discrimination. She had worked tirelessly for this moment, and as the flight attendants moved through the aisle and the hum of the engine filled her ears, she felt a sense of accomplishment. For a brief second, she let herself relax. No arguments, no doubts, no accusations, just the quiet certainty that she was prepared for whatever came next. But in the back of her mind, she knew that this peaceful moment would be fleeting. Her fight wasn't over. And, as she would soon learn, the battle waiting for her wasn't going to be fought in a courtroom. It would be fought on a plane, in the very place where she thought she could escape from it all. Amina took a deep breath, closing her eyes. She wasn't prepared for the storm that was about to hit. Not yet. Amina adjusted the hem of her navy blue dress, taking a deep breath. It had been a long day already, and the last thing she wanted was to be confronted by a stranger's judgment. She was seated in first class, a quiet moment before the chaos of the upcoming court case. Her fingers rested on the edge of her seat, her mind preparing for the battle ahead. Then she heard it. "Well, I'll be damned. I never expected to see someone dressed like that in a place like this." Mr. Gregson's voice broke through the calm. Amina froze. She glanced over at the middle-aged man seated across the aisle. He was eyeing her with a mixture of disdain and curiosity, his gaze lingering on her dress, clearly appraising. "Isn't this a bit extravagant for someone in your position?" he continued, his words dripping with thinly veiled judgment. "I mean, no offense, but it's not exactly the kind of attire I expect from someone in your line of work." She stiffened, but kept her expression neutral, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. The comment hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Amina took a breath, steadying herself. She had dealt with far worse in her career, far more malicious taunts than this. But the casual nature of it, the complete lack of effort to mask the disdain, cut deeper than she expected. Gregson didn't stop there. His voice grew louder as the plane took off, and with each passing minute his comments grew bolder. "I mean, you must be some kind of judge, huh? No offense, but someone like you, in charge of making decisions for the law? That's a pretty big stretch." He chuckled under his breath, as if he had made a joke. Amina's heart rate quickened, the weight of the words sinking in. She knew exactly what he was insinuating. It wasn't about her qualifications or her professional integrity. It was about the simple fact that a woman like her, a black woman, didn't belong in positions of authority. His judgment wasn't just about her clothes, it was about her very existence. "I'm sure you have some legal training, but," he added, leaning closer as if sharing a secret, "don't you think a woman like you should be in a different seat? First class doesn't seem like the place for someone who doesn't even fit the role." Every word dripped with the same venom, each remark more biting than the last. Amina's jaw clenched. She didn't want to make a scene, she never did, but her patience was wearing thin. She glanced toward the flight attendants who were chatting near the back of the cabin. Without drawing attention to herself, she raised her hand slightly, a subtle signal. The flight attendant made eye contact with her but then quickly looked away, resuming the conversation with her colleague, as if Amina hadn't even spoken up. Her stomach churned with frustration. She could feel the heat in her cheeks rising, but she didn't want to escalate things. She didn't want to be seen as the angry black woman who couldn't handle a simple comment. "Can you believe this?" Gregson's voice sliced through her thoughts again. "I mean, really, a judge from a place like that? I guess anything's possible in today's world." Amina shot another glance at the flight attendants, but nothing had changed. They pretended not to see her distress, pretending the problem wasn't theirs to solve. Amina's gaze swept across the cabin, searching the faces of the other passengers. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting away whenever they met hers. A few seemed to shift in their seats, visibly uneasy, but none of them spoke up. Not one person came to her defense. Her breath caught in her chest. The silence was deafening. The tension in the air thickened as Gregson continued to jab at her, unaware or perhaps uncaring of how uncomfortable his words were making the people around them. In that moment, Amina realized something that made her chest tighten even more. It wasn't just Gregson, it was everyone around her. No one was willing to stand up for what was right. They were all complicit in their silence, and she was alone. Gregson leaned back in his seat, eyes narrowing as he studied Amina. She could feel his gaze burning through her. He wasn't done. She had hoped that the awkward silence that followed his last jab would deter him, but his next words came crashing through the air, louder this time, as if he was testing the limits of his boldness. "I bet you didn't even have to work that hard to get here," Gregson said with a smirk. I mean, let's be honest, it's all about that affirmative action, right? That's the only reason someone like you would get to sit in first class. Someone like me, someone who's worked for everything. Well, we don't get those kinds of breaks. Amina's face burned with fury as his words sliced through the air, but she didn't let him see it. He laughed, and a few of the passengers nearby looked over. She could hear a nervous chuckle from one man seated across the aisle, his eyes shifting uncomfortably. But there was no outrage, no intervention. The tension in the cabin thickened, and Gregson continued his taunts, growing more confident by the second. "Tell me, what's it like knowing you didn't earn your place?" he prodded, clearly savoring the moment. "It must feel pretty sweet to have it handed to you." Amina clenched her fists. She'd faced these types of comments before, but not so publicly. Not so openly humiliating. The mockery wasn't just about her professional achievements. It was an attack on her very identity, her worth. Just as Amina opened her mouth, ready to respond, a voice cut through the chaos, sharp and defiant. "Hey, that's enough," a woman's voice called out from a few rows behind. Amina turned quickly to see another black woman, her arms crossed, her expression fierce. "You can't talk to her like that. Don't you dare." The words were like a breath of fresh air, but Gregson wasn't having it. He looked at the woman, dismissing her immediately with a wave of his hand. "Who the hell are you to tell me what I can and can't say?" Gregson sneered. "Maybe you should worry about your own seat before you try to play the hero." Amina's heart sank. The woman had tried to stand up for her, but now, like everyone else, she was pushed back into silence. Gregson's arrogance seemed limitless, and he didn't care who saw it. Amina had hoped for more, a united front, but the reality was different. She wasn't sure who she felt more betrayed by, Gregson, or the woman who was now shrinking back into her seat, defeated. Amina looked around the cabin, her pulse quickening. She searched desperately for someone, anyone, to speak up. The white faces around her were impassive. No one said a word. No one made a move. The silence was deafening. The flight attendants? They were still busy, pretending as if they hadn't heard the growing tension between them. It was as if Amina's discomfort didn't matter, as if the harassment she was facing didn't warrant their attention. She glanced at the woman who had briefly spoken up. But now, that woman's eyes were focused on the floor, her shoulders hunched as if she too was trying to disappear. Amina couldn't blame her. She had tried to help, but now there was nothing but shame and regret in her eyes. Amina swallowed hard, fighting the lump that had formed in her throat. This was it. The full weight of what was happening bore down on her. The isolation, the humiliation, the knowledge that, no matter how much she had achieved, this moment, was what people saw first. Her thoughts were interrupted by Gregson's laughter, louder now, like he had won something. As the minutes dragged on, the sting of Gregson's insults continued to reverberate through Amina. It wasn't just the mocking or the humiliation. It was the realization that this was part of a much larger pattern. This wasn't just about a rude man on a plane. This was about the system that had been built to uphold these very injustices. The racial biases that existed in every corner of society, whether in the courtroom, the boardroom, or on a flight to a major case. The flight attendants still hadn't intervened. Amina knew they had heard everything, had seen everything, but they did nothing. It wasn't just Gregson's actions. It was the fact that the world had conditioned everyone to turn a blind eye to what was wrong, to accept it as normal, as though this kind of behavior was just a part of everyday life. As she thought about the cases she fought for, about the young people of color whose voices were silenced in the courtrooms every day, Amina felt the weight of it all. The burden wasn't just hers to carry, it was a collective weight, a reflection of how the system perpetuated these moments of humiliation, these small, insidious acts of racism. And no one was stopping it. No one was going to stop it. Amina's heart raced as she felt the weight of the room's indifference crush her. She couldn't take it anymore. Just as she was about to sink deeper into the sea of isolation, the cockpit door opened. Out stepped a man, his posture straight, his gaze commanding. "Everything all right here?" Captain Roland Walker's voice rang through the cabin, smooth yet firm, as though his presence alone had the power to still the room. Amina's breath caught in her chest. He was older, late 50s, his face weathered by experience, but there was a quiet authority in his every movement. She hadn't expected this. He wasn't just a flight attendant. He was the captain. And, like Amina, he was black. His presence was like a beacon of hope, cutting through the tension in an instant. Gregson's demeanor shifted the moment he saw him. He had been the loudest in the cabin, but now, seeing the captain step forward, he faltered for a second. Captain Walker's eyes locked onto Gregson, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Captain Walker moved with purpose, stepping into the space between Gregson and Amina. His voice was calm, but it held an undeniable edge. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back," Captain Walker said, his tone sharp but controlled. "Your behavior is unacceptable, and it's not going to continue on this flight." Gregson, caught off guard by the interruption, scoffed. "What are you going to do about it? You can't just tell me to—" "I can, and I will." The captain cut him off, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What you've said to her, what you've done, won't be tolerated on my flight. Not from anyone, no matter who they think they are." He paused for a beat, his voice never rising above a controlled calm. "Apologize, now." Amina watched, stunned. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone had stood up for her, and they weren't backing down. Gregson's face flushed a deep red. He opened his mouth to protest, but the captain's unwavering gaze silenced him. Gregson shifted uneasily in his seat, his hands trembling as he wiped sweat from his brow. The air around him, once thick with his bravado, now felt stifling. The captain's presence, as unyielding as it was, had cracked his facade. "Look, I didn't mean—" Gregson began, his words suddenly trailing off, a nervousness creeping into his voice. "You meant exactly what you said," Captain Walker replied, his voice now carrying the weight of authority. "You've humiliated her in front of everyone, and I'm not going to let that go. If you're not willing to apologize, you'll be escorted off this plane. We're done here." Gregson's face contorted in frustration. He hadn't expected things to turn against him so quickly. The cabin, once silent and tense, now buzzed with a quiet electricity. Amina could see the doubt settling into his eyes as he looked around. The others were watching him closely now. He had lost control of the situation. "I'm sorry," Gregson muttered, his voice barely audible, a stark contrast to the earlier mocking tone. "I didn't mean it like that. I apologize." The apology was hollow, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. A low murmur spread through the cabin. The passengers who had been passive and silent moments ago now exchanged glances. The atmosphere had shifted, the tension replaced with a collective sense of quiet defiance. There was a subtle power in the air, something that had been absent since the moment Gregson had opened his mouth. Amina noticed a few nodding heads, a few whispered words of agreement. Her pulse, which had been racing in anxiety moments ago, now steadied. She could feel the tide turning, a ripple of support growing with each passing second. She wasn't alone anymore. One of the flight attendants, who had been standing off to the side, took a step forward and addressed the captain, her tone respectful but firm. "Thank you for stepping in, Captain Walker," she said. "We've got this under control now." The captain gave a slight nod but didn't take his eyes off Gregson. "Make sure it stays that way," he said, his voice low but clear. As the tension slowly began to dissipate, Amina allowed herself to breathe again. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence that had once suffocated her was replaced with a sense of justice, quiet but firm. The small victory was hers, and it was a start. The ripple of defiance was growing. As the plane touched down at the next stop, the tension in the cabin hadn't fully dissipated. Gregson, now visibly shaken, stood from his seat, his body rigid with humiliation. The captain's words had stripped him of his bravado, but the worst was yet to come. The flight attendants flanked him as he moved toward the exit, their presence a silent statement of his disgrace. Amina watched, heart pounding, as the murmurs of passengers grew louder. Phones emerged from pockets, cameras clicking to capture the moment. The once untouchable Gregson was being escorted off the plane in shame, a man undone by his own arrogance. "You're banned," the captain's voice rang out one final time as Gregson passed him, his words final and cold. "You'll never fly with this airline again." Gregson didn't respond, his head bowed in defeat, as the passengers continued to record the spectacle. The cameras were everywhere now. The entire plane had witnessed his downfall. And as the doors closed behind him, it was clear. His reputation would never recover from this public exposure. The incident didn't end with Gregson's exit. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story. A viral moment had been born, and the hero wasn't just Captain Walker, but also Amina, who had endured it all in silence before stepping into the light. The headlines blazed with phrases like, "Captain stands up to discrimination," and "Flight crew confronts passenger over racism." The footage, captured by passengers on their phones, showed Captain Walker's calm yet firm confrontation. His voice, strong and unwavering, became a symbol of justice in an unjust world. The captain didn't just step in as an authority figure, one interview read. He became the voice of every person who has been silenced by racism. His actions were a stand against all the small moments of disrespect we endure in silence. Soon, social media platforms were flooded with support for the captain, and Amina's name began to circulate. People called her a hero, a voice for those who could never speak up. This wasn't just about a confrontation on a plane. This was a defining moment in the ongoing battle against racial injustice. For Amina, the transformation was surreal. The girl who had been humiliated moments ago was now sitting in front of a camera, speaking with conviction. The interviews came fast. Television spots, podcasts, and online features. "I was just trying to get through the flight," Amina said in one interview, her voice steady, "but sometimes it takes one moment, one person, to turn things around. Captain Walker didn't just save me, he showed the world that we all deserve respect, no matter what." Her words carried weight. The once fearful woman, who had felt alone and powerless, was now using her voice to inspire others. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Social media was flooded with messages of solidarity. Amina, once the target of a hateful remark, had become a symbol of courage. "I never thought my voice could matter this much," Amina admitted in an emotional speech on a popular talk show. "But I realized, if we don't speak up, nothing changes." Her story, her bravery, was resonating with people far beyond the plane. She had become the face of a movement, urging others to stand up, speak out, and refuse to be silenced. Amina's bravery, amplified by Captain Walker's support, had sparked a broader conversation. News outlets continued to cover the story, but now the focus was on something bigger. It wasn't just about what had happened on that plane. It was about the fight against systemic racism and the microaggressions that plagued everyday life. "Why do we stay silent?" one prominent activist asked during a live broadcast. "Why do we allow these small injustices to go unchallenged? It's time we all start speaking up. Like Amina did, like Captain Walker did." As the weeks passed, more and more people shared their own experiences of racial discrimination, encouraged by Amina's journey. From workplaces to schools, from shopping malls to airports, the conversation about confronting racism became louder and more urgent. In a final interview, Amina reflected on the lasting impact of that single moment. "It's not about the incident itself. It's about the fact that we don't have to tolerate being treated like this anymore. We can choose to confront it, challenge it, and make the world better for everyone." Her story had become the spark, and the flames of change were beginning to spread. People weren't just standing up for Amina, they were standing up for themselves. As the story unfolds, we want to hear from you. How would you respond if you were in Amina's shoes? Would you confront the injustice head-on or stay silent? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going about the everyday racism that too many people face and how we can all make a difference. Think about a time when you've witnessed or experienced something similar, whether it was a microaggression or a blatant act of discrimination. How did it make you feel? Amina's story is not just hers, it's the story of so many people. Together, we can create a world where standing up for what's right is the norm. Share your thoughts, and let's stand in solidarity with those who are often silenced.